Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage.
I'm really glad we've connected.
It's nice to actually sit down and have a conversation, a proper conversation about all your work with BPT and what seems like an absolute explosion of pilgrimages in Britain.
Certainly an explosion of the number of pilgrimages. And we know that the opportunity is huge in terms of the number of routes and number of places, and just mapping it all onto one place and allowing people to see it is fantastic. And there's this groundswell of activity all over Britain, local communities creating new routes and telling us about it. And then we add their routes onto our platform. So it's been really great. There's a huge opportunity as well. We did a recent survey which showed us that 8 million people, UK adults, are thinking of considering making a pilgrimage. So there's actually a massive market opportunity here if you want to talk about it in those terms. And the next question we're going to ask them is this YouGov survey is, and have you heard of the British Pilgrimage Trust? Have you used our resources and stuff? So we can actually know what the gap is, because I imagine it's not many people have heard of us, in the grand scheme of events.
So that is a good point. So what do you attribute this flourishing interest in pilgrimage to? Is there a marked difference that you can track between how people were engaging with pilgrimage before the pandemic and then after? Is that where the point in time really can be marked in terms of this explosive growth of both interest and new routes?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the quickest answer of why it's working, why it's really getting quite more like there's more of a craving for it. And when you talk to people, they just say, "Oh, you don't have to really explain it." At the beginning, I had to really explain it and try and pitch it, and I was trying all these different methods of making people interested. But now you just have to say it like in a sentence, and people get it. They don't really have to know much about it. Whereas 10 years ago, they would have asked a lot more questions.
Yes.
And I just think what we're doing now, in the situation where we're looking at a screen, we're in this kind of strange virtual world. We might be slightly connected to the room around us, possibly if we're lucky, but we're probably in our heads. We're looking at a screen, and we're in that world. And so much of us, we spend in that world and slightly don't really question it. It is a virtual reality. I'm seeing myself move, and I'm seeing you, and you're like miles away.
Yes.
And I think it's not, I'm not against it. I mean, I do it all the time. I love it. But I also feel that there's a real world out there, and putting our body into it and really feeling our body connecting with the land and all these different places, and the importance of actual place as opposed to ideas and communication via the internet. I think that there's a craving that a kind of counterbalance to what's happening. And people say it all the time, and a lot of people mention it. And in a way, when I hear myself talking now, I hear it's a bit of a cliche, we have so much technology and stuff. But actually, the opposite of technology and being lost in the virtual world is being completely connected to the physical world. And I think there are different ways of doing that. I mean, gardening's really good, farming and growing livestock and or being, connected with animals and plants. And also going into beautiful sacred architecture, and all these are ways of connecting our bodies with the land. But pilgrimage is a maybe slightly more accessible version than all of that. You just walk.
Certainly, it's easy to leave the house and walk when there are so many available routes to walk and pathways to walk on that cross natural landscapes.
Yeah. Well, we have this incredible system called the public footpath network system.
Okay.
And these were public rights of way that were put down into law about in the 1700s. And they have basically remained ever since. And people can walk along them by right. It's just their right to walk along them. And, if you buy a house with one of them going through your land, you get a cheaper house because of it.
I
And
didn't
therefore,
realize that this is codified within the legal system.
yeah, totally codified, like it's totally protected. And actually, there's a campaign at the moment to discover hitherto unforgotten like footpaths that historically we do know exist and have been used, and they're going to resurrect them and they're going to reinstate them as like legal pathways. And they've got I think they've got until 2031 to get them all online, go through the process of finding all the evidence for it, and then they'll all be added. And then people won't, if it goes through your land, you're just going to have to let people walk through it. But some people get cross when people walk through, but they can't because they've actually benefited and been compensated for the fact they've got it. So it's an interesting one. I mean, there's a whole discussion around right to roam in Britain. It's quite political, and I probably annoy certain people saying a certain thing. So, but I suppose the positive response to all of it is, I think we should make more of the public footpaths that do exist, and make people aware of just how amazing it is to walk along them and what's in store for them if they do.
I would like to go back. I think you've brought a staff from one of your pilgrimages.
Well, I didn't bring my staff. I'm at my mentor's house. This is his library, Rupert Sheldrake, who actually was a founding patron of the British Pilgrimage Trust. And I said to him, look, I couldn't bring a staff, but he's given me his walking stick. So there we go. It does the job a bit. I asked him, do you have a staff? He didn't. He have a walking stick, but there we go. It's a proxy for my wooden staff. But to be honest, every hazel tree you can cut these in all the hazel coppice in Britain. You can cut these staffs from. So it's I have many. But the thing about the wooden staff is it shows other people that you're a bit like a pilgrim.
I can imagine that Rupert has had quite an influence on your perspectives of pilgrimage and how people are engaging with landscapes.
Yeah, I mean, I think he quickly got early on when I first mentioned the idea to him, like the importance of pilgrimage. I went to a talk by him with a dialogue with him and Mark Vernon last night, and in it he mentioned that we're living in a kind of age of spiritual crisis, and I think the Christian church is the one really in crisis. I don't think the Islamic church not really church, but the Islamic religion is not really in crisis, and Judaism is not really in crisis as a religion, and Hinduism certainly isn't, and Buddhism isn't. Like, in these countries, people just basically believe. But in our society, there's a much more of a problem around, like, is this stuff actually true? Should we even be focusing on these pointless rituals, as some people think, or what's the point of these buildings and churches? Like, people like don't go to church, for example, and we started the British Pilgrimage Trust by saying bring your own beliefs, and I still hold to that, because I think it's not really about beliefs, and I think Rupert has helped me realize that it's the practice that really matters around the world, what you actually do, and the beliefs are you can talk about them and you can analyze them, but they're not really the main story. The main story is experience, and I think we are shifting generally in across the world more towards experience than just more and more belief discussion.
I was actually going to ask exactly about this, around this crisis of belief.
Yeah, well, I think science was born here and in the West, and particularly in Britain with the Royal Society. And I mean, obviously, the Islamic science was very impressive in the 13th century, but like in terms of science as we know it, that has taken over the world now, started here in the 17th century, and basically its job was to try and access nature directly so that we could avoid theological squabbles, because there was a lot of pain, with the Protestants and the Catholics and all these different thought systems. So science was designed to actually put an end to all this. But what it did eventually was it started to remove spirit from the equation. So you ended up with just matter. And then in a most extreme form, I suppose it's Richard Dawkins saying, there's no consciousness, the genes are totally selfish. There's no connection between us and everything around us through consciousness alone. And I just think that's led to a situation where even in, let's say, India, the scientists have to believe this whole world system whilst they're actually working. But then when they go home, they act totally differently. So they're sort of living a double life. Same in Islamic countries. In Christian countries, you can have priests who don't really believe that it's actually true. They're more interested in the moral side of it and how you should behave and what you should do and how you be a good human, rather than the mystical. What is it? What are we all here for? And does prayer actually work? That kind of stuff. I think so. Rupert's really influenced me in thinking like that, and around prayer, meditation, connecting with nature, holy days and festivals, singing and chanting, fasting, sports, all these different cross-cultural spiritual practices. And he's done a study of the scientific benefits of each of these. And it's all about what do we do? How do we do spirituality? How do we heal ourselves through our own actions? We have much more power than we realize we do to heal ourselves. It's really old and basic, and we can just do it. And pilgrimage is a particularly easy way of doing it, I think, in terms of it's not that complicated. You just walk. And so I think the health benefits are huge, and this takes it slightly out of the realm of like, are you right and are you wrong? It's more, you're open. I think we're on this psychology of pilgrimage podcast. I think the psychology of a pilgrim is high. If you were to measure it, it would be high on the metric of openness.
Yes,
because even priests or bishops, whatever, or imams, or when they do pilgrimage, they are like anyone else. And that I think the leveling aspect of it is really important, but the openness to change, because you don't know what's going to happen when you go on a journey.
And even people who did not intend to or who did not approach pilgrimage with this openness often talk about the openness as a result. So I think you're exactly right. I think that people who are who have higher inclinations towards openness pursue pilgrimage, and I think people, once they become a pilgrim and go on a pilgrimage, they actually trend towards more openness. So I do think that is a really important facet of pilgrimages.
Yeah. I mean, Chaucer, I think, described as pilgrim is someone who walks towards an unknown destination with a true heart. And I think openness is the true heart thing. All we have at the end of the day is our heart. When everything else goes to pot and we lose all other reference points like rudders or like stabilizers, what does our heart tell us?
I've been thinking a lot about the concept of consecration and what that means within the context of pilgrimage. And I think openness is this consecrated heart, that we can think about consecration in many types of religious ways in terms of an authoritative figure consecrating something or land or a building or a shrine or a relic. But the consecrated heart is this open heart that has decided to be open and to embrace the unknown.
Yeah. And also there's an element, we also have to listen to it. So a lot of what we do is governed by the head, or we think it's governed by the head, and we can get into a bit of a tiz and get confused. And I personally think of the head as a bit like stabilizers on a bike. It's like the heart is what leads us forward. It's the thrust of moving forward on a bicycle. And sometimes you need stabilizers just to make sure everything's right, and just check the facts and make sure it all stacks up and it's not like completely offline. But really, I don't think anything we do, any changes that happen, I think they rarely come through the head. There's always the heart playing. So I think it's more powerful ultimately. And you're going with the flow more when you're doing that. You're feeling into a journey. And I think I wouldn't have talked like this when I first started. I think I've learned through my own journey that this is true, certainly for me. I mean, sounds a bit hippie perhaps, but I think it isn't. It's all I can say.
You think it isn't, and you feel it isn't.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking of...
Yeah, exactly. It's the language.
Yeah. I'm seeing the BPT as being a connector from this sort of this dichotomy, or this divergent path between science and faith, or science and the heart. And BPT seems to fill this vehicle for knitting people back to the heart.
Well, yeah, I don't actually use this language like on our website very much. I probably should more. But I think by saying bring your own beliefs, you're basically saying, okay, let's just put all the head stuff to one side, and put yourself on the path. And as soon as you do that, you're in a more of a vulnerable position when you're on the path, because you've got to make sure you've got enough water, that your shoes are okay, and that your feet are okay, and your body is okay, and that you're going to have enough food when you get to the right place, and you've got a bed to stay, so you're going to have enough sleep to get to the next. It's really straightforward stuff, but you have to be present to it, and you have to be aware of it. You have to make sure you go in the right direction, be present to the environment around you, so that if stuff, any dangers or hazards you're like aware of, like you're really in the world. You meet people and they come across your path. Strangers start to tell you things, and you're like, why are they telling me that? And then you sometimes read signs into it, or but it's like engaging clutch with actually life itself and in the world. I think if we stay too much behind our laptops, we can spin off into all sorts of realms that may exist, and they are existing. I mean, there are all sorts of like amazing worlds out there, metaverse and virtual reality, and like the internet as we know it. But that's not reality of being out in the land. It's a very, very different reality, and we all know deep down that is a reality that we have to pay attention to, and you learn from it. You can't know what you're going to learn before you go out. That's the point, really.
Yeah, it seems like I've written a bit about how pilgrimages in this kind of from a psychological standpoint of this hierarchy of needs that were outlined by Maslow, that there's this basic level of physiological needs that you just described, that people are attuned to, their shelter and their food, and very basic human needs. But the paradox of the pilgrimage is that people are focused and very present on these basic physiological needs, and in doing this, they have the opportunity to sort of become more self-actualized and more attuned to their humanity. So it's a strange, as I said, it's a strange paradox for me to think about the people having an experience, to have a basic human experience, very focused on the present and the survival in the present. And in doing so, they have these wildly profound connective experiences with other people as well as with the natural world.
I think it's to do with safety. I think it's to do with when you're really safe and you're grounded in proper reality, you can then start flying really high and you can start really going into transcendent
Yeah.
realms. I think when you're ungrounded and you're in the virtual space, I think it's too dangerous to go there, because it's not natural. It's not how it's always been, or it's not sort of what we've known for thousands of years. And I think if you're taking Indian spirituality, for example, they can create incredible feelings of, I suppose, what you would call energy in your, and you feel it. You feel the energy of a ceremony. But all they'll be doing is pouring liquid over statues. This is very, very material. It's like extremely materialistic in a way. It's like you got to get the milk, you got to get the yogurt, the honey, the red water, the yellow water. You're pouring it over this statue that has been, and there's no talking, there's no beliefs, there's no, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? This is how you should live. There's none of that. It's just, what do you feel after it? And I think there's something like that happens on pilgrimage. Like when you go to holy places, you feel the peace in them. Like, to be honest, I've had this discussion even with like really hardcore atheists who love going to churches because it makes them feel peaceful. Now,
these are the highly sensory experiences that cannot be accessed through the best technology in virtual reality right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's going to happen is as Mark Zuckerberg invests more and more money in the metaverse, it's unbelievable. They've said they're going to invest $250 billion into the metaverse over the next 10 years, which is actually more than the Apollo space program altogether. We are going to start spending more time in the metaverse. It's just going to happen. And the virtual reality, and as that becomes more exciting, people will spend more time there. It's just what always happens. But in counter to that, we're going to start craving really high quality place experiences, which are real. So because the average person in suburbia who might not like their house that much, or where they're living, let's say, they may spend more and more time in the metaverse to escape their reality. But I think because that can't provide everything. So eventually there'll be a swing in the other direction and people will crave places more. And we're back to where we started, really, me saying that. But I think my own journey has been about coming back to my body. And I did a PhD at Cambridge on psychology of music. And it was a really heady experience. And it didn't really suit me, if I'm being honest, and in terms of the actual process. And I was maybe quite a heady kind of guy, like often thinking about things, often overanalyzing. Well, not to say overanalyzing, just analyzing a lot. And then as time's gone on, like practices like yoga and pilgrimage and just being in nature and slowing down and all these different kinds of things, they're so important for me feeling happy and healthy.
I would like to hear about the person of Guy and how you landed in, or how you evolved into co-founding the BPT.
Well, I'll give you the full story. Why not? Because it's never the full story, of course. It's as far back as I can go. But I grew up in a family when my parents were Christian Scientists. I don't know if you know about that. Do you know
Yes.
much about that? In America, it's an American thing. So
Yeah, of course. I live in Concord, New Hampshire, where Mary Baker Eddy built
yeah,
had the church built. So yes, I'm familiar with
okay,
this.
okay, great. So um, that was how I was brought up. It was it's very beautiful in many ways. That religion, sect, whatever you want to call it, cult. It's lovely. There's a lot of light to it, a lot of purity, and my parents are really loving people. Um, but there was a narrowness to it for me. The philosophy was quite narrow. I couldn't believe all of it. Like, especially when it said matter is unreal. Like, the body side of things was always pushed to one side because it's an idealistic religion. So it's mainly focusing on the mind and consciousness and prayer and things like that. And we didn't take any medicine. I didn't go to the doctors very much. Like, I was pretty disconnected from my body. And I wouldn't have described it that as a child, but I was later discovered that. And the other thing was, it created rift in my family. Like, my grandparents really didn't like it, and then, there's all sorts going on there too. But like, there was this division created by this belief system, and I found it hard. I found it slightly too extreme, and I didn't know how to say that to my parents. I didn't know how to have the conversation. So I didn't want to. Well, because they're investing their life in it. However, there were also good things about it too. But it was the fact that was the one path, the one way to do things that I found difficult, because I just thought there's so much out there to discover. So around 12, 13 years old, I became an atheist, I think, or at least I believe in science, like that kind of thing. And then I was a choir boy as well. I was a choir boy at Bath Abbey, so like singing sacred music all the time. And then when I got to university, I was still singing sacred music as a choral scholar. And then, of course, at university, and especially at a place like Cambridge, people are trying to be clever the whole time. So they don't want to admit that they might not believe certain tenets of science. And so you sort of suppress it, and you say, okay, well, I don't want to be seen as unintelligent or soft in the head. So I'm going to sort of suppress that, because I don't really, yeah. And I carried on this. I got harder and harder into this materialistic, mechanistic materialist worldview. But then I was getting unhappier, and around 23, when I was starting my PhD, I really got quite unhappy, because I went through a bit of a process and eventually came to the realization that my worldview wasn't really supporting happiness. I was feeling like isolated and disconnected and not really belonging. And so I went through a bit of a change, and then started to feel connected to more things. I started doing family constellations with Rupert's wife, Jill Peirce. And then I met Rupert through that. And they really opened my mind to a more sort of broad way of looking at things. There was no less spiritual, like perhaps probably more so, in fact, but just more richer maybe, and more multifaceted. And because of that, I started to feel there was possibility here. But then their sons, Merlin and Cosmo, had a couple of wandering minstrels over for dinner one night, and I was house sitting at the time. Actually, it's where I am right now. And they invited me. I came to dinner, and then I met Will Parsons and his mate Ed, and they were regaling of stories of singing on the paths, like cooking by the campfire, bathing in the rivers, foraging for food, being welcomed into pubs and to people's homes. And I just thought, this sounds amazing. So different to what I was doing. We stuck behind a laptop doing lots of research the whole time. And at the end of my PhD, I started walking the River Cam, and then when it finished, I went with Will along a river to take a song back to where it came from. And the song was about this tragedy of gypsies who were hot pickers, and then the bridge broke, and then they drowned in this river. And when we were walking 70 miles along the river, and it took a week. And when we got to the monument, there was this couple, and they were standing there, and we thought, "What are you doing here?" And then they said, "Well, we tried to find this place 10 years ago. We're here for 5 minutes longer." We said, "Well, what's your connection to the tragedy?" We'd been singing this song to everyone we met along the way, so it was quite weird they were there. And then they said, well, 3 of my ancestors died in the tragedy, which was, mind-blowing. And then we said, "Have you heard the song?" And they hadn't heard the song. So we actually got to return the song to the bloodline, not just the place. And the idea was to take the song back to its place. And I think this is why I talk about the heart, because the place and the heart here were very connected. We were actually taking it back, the song back into the hearts of the people whose family died. And it wasn't just about singing it to stones or earth. So it was a mixture of things. Anyway, I walked out of the graveyard, and then I think we had this realization. I can't remember how it happened really, but we basically said, okay, something has happened there. How did it happen? Because it was pretty coincidental. We've seen lots of synchronicity in this journey. And we thought, well, maybe it's a bit like a pilgrimage. It felt more than a walk. We'd actually gone into a few churches, mainly to charge our phones and to cool down from the sun. We weren't really thinking religiously or spiritually in that way. And then we thought, well, it's a bit like pilgrimage. And but why is no one doing pilgrimage in Britain? And then we found out that Henry VIII had banned it in 1538. So we thought, oh, okay, well, maybe we can bring it back. We've got this blank slate, and we can bring back a tradition however we like. And if it catches on, it catches on. So we just saw these passionate nutters, really. I mean, we were sort of in no money, and we were just walking around the land trying to tell everyone about pilgrimage, and not that many people were interested. I mean, we really having to work hard. And but then this newspaper published an article about it, because I'd launched this other website called Choral Evensong Trust, and then they got to learn about the pilgrimage through that, and then they launched an article. It just slowly grew. Our confidence grew that we were onto something. But I think in terms of me personally, how I got to this, I needed a practice that brought people together, connected me with my body, I suppose, and nature, and something that would allow people to talk to each other without division and without disagreement, and just because they're all sharing one destination, or at least they're sharing the practice of walking together, and it sort of loosens all these hang-ups, I suppose. So I'm doing this job because I need it for myself. Like I need to heal, and I'm not that badly. I mean, I'm fine. I mean, I'm not like major issues. But then I guess we all have major issues, really, because being alive is a major issue. Dealing with being human, dealing with duality is a major issue. So we need to find ways of handling that. And for me, one of them is pilgrimage. There are others, but you can. Pilgrimage is the one that you can do anywhere and everywhere. And yeah, I don't know if that's enough of an answer. There was a time of depression, I think, that was really key, and it sort of led that idea of seeing the world's the bigger place, but feeling like I could belong in the land. That was a really important part of getting better.
One of the themes that I also see in your narrative that is a common interest for me, this element inspires me about pilgrimage, and that is there is this beautiful platform for connecting people in a way that defenses are down. We're connecting human to human. We don't have to talk about politics or other matters that divide us. And so I think that's at the fore. But the other part that you addressed is that there's such a deep connection to the actual people who lived before us. And that, to me, is one of the remarkable elements of pilgrimage that cannot be explained. That during these pilgrimages, very often there are these moments of serendipity and synchronicity, as you've talked about, that connect people not only to each other in the moment, but to past people, past family members, ancestors, or other historical figures or events. And to me, that is it's absolutely remarkable that this can happen during a pilgrimage.
Yeah. I mean, it's connecting us both laterally to, to other people in this realm, in this time, those alive today, but also those not alive, and the depth and the vertical nature of that connection. But that's just in the human realm. It's also connecting humans to animals and the birds that fly past, and the fox that you see going across the way, and then plants and the soil, and the fact your feet are on the soil the whole time, and the sky, and then at night the stars, and just you're plugging into the mains, basically, the true mains, and like that's we talk about looking at watching the stars on Netflix, but literally watching the stars does something else, and you can't really replicate it. Yeah. So it's about, I think, putting us in the world, really make, like, I think a lot of mental health is about feeling like you don't belong. That might just be me projecting my own past feelings, but the more I've grown, the more I feel like I belong, and the more I feel like I belong here, the happier I am.
Yes, I agree. I think that the belonging piece is something that I've also experienced personally, but I've also identified in talking to a lot of pilgrims. They're seeking that to begin with, or it certainly is a result of a pilgrimage, is this sense of belongingness, as well as you just said, lateral and vertical connection, and connection that transcends even the human element.
Yeah.
So how did you take this really profound experience of returning a song to its place and to the hearts of the people that it belonged to, and create an organization structurally to move forward your gift of pilgrimage to those who would receive it?
Well, we were co-founders, me and Will, and we both had different strengths at the time. And Will had been more steeped in it. He'd been walking for 10 years, and he has a very brilliant mind of coming up with the thing that needs to be said and that will get people going, and realize the power of photos and social media. So he got going on that side of things. And then we started building a website. Then the structure was just like on slightly back of an envelope, kind of starting a unincorporated trust with £10 literally in an envelope. And Cosmo Sheldrake witnessed the signature, and Merlin became the first trustee. And it was it was pretty organic. I mean, I'll never know how it really happened, but I met people through the Sheldrake, through Rupert, through Jill's work. Met the Duchess of Norfolk, and that gave us a bit of credibility, and she introduced us to some people, and we then, I mean, Rupert found some money from nowhere to pay for my effectively salary from this foundation in Switzerland, and that was pretty amazing because I didn't have anything, and I was a student. I was studying singing at like an opera school kind of thing, college, music college, and I didn't know where my life was going. It was pretty ropey, and then I this money came through, and I was able to focus more on the pilgrimage, and then this funder met Rupert as well and said, I want to write a book about, believing in God, different scientists that believe in God. And Rupert basically said, we don't need any more books in the world. I mean, he'd obviously liked books, you can see, but he said ultimately the world doesn't really need more books. It needs more experiences to connect us. So I recommend you actually put your efforts towards the British Pilgrimage Trust. And he became our chairman, this guy called Peter Gangstead, and he helped us with funding. And then, having grown-ups in the room, started to apply a bit more structure. But I think, what drove it was just me just going around meeting people and trying to network, I suppose, and get more people interested, and then talking to the press, and Will's ideas around how do you talk to the press, what kind of messages do you give them, bring your own beliefs was his idea, and the sanctuary network of like low cost accommodation churches and stuff to get people's to pique people's interest. We're always looking for that thing that would get people going and get press interested, because it's a hard sell. Religion, anything to do with spirituality, religion, or anything like remotely connected to it is tough work, just because of the society we live in. So you have to find ways to sort of bypass that skepticism. I mean, to know how the best answer to your question is, we had to attract enough money in to get us to buy us the time to build it, but it was pretty inefficient. The first 3 years or so, we were flapping around, really. There was a lot of passion, a lot of talking, a lot of envisioning, but not much. It wasn't very channeled, the energy. And just as we've grown, we've just become more and more and more focused, I think, and assured of what we're trying to do. We might be going out completely the wrong path. I may find that out in a few years' time. We're like, why didn't we do that? But I don't know where any of this comes from, really. I never wanted to start a pilgrim charity. I mean, this wasn't the plan.
I think that the anecdotal evidence that, at least that I see, you're doing a very nice job of posting what the BPT means to people and the experiences that people are having. So I think you're definitely on the right track. At least from what I can see, people are really engaging with this idea of pilgrimage in general, and in specific with the individual pilgrimages that they're undertaking.
Yeah, I feel like we're woefully underperforming. Like, I just feel that, this really could help so many people and give people so much more meaning, and we could get millions more doing it. And I've just been to the Kumbh Mela in India, where there were literally 400 million. Well, I say literally, it's probably a massive exaggeration,
Yes.
but
It's hard to track the numbers.
But a lot of people basically all going to the source, not the source, the confluence of three rivers. And to think that the world's biggest pilgrimage destination is three rivers meeting. It's not a temple. It's not a mosque or a synagogue, or it's not humans having built something. It's nature itself. And the merging of opposites, the merging of separate entities into one, is the message there. And to seeing how many people turn up for that, there's no reason why we can't turn our music festivals. Like Coachella could become, let's say, a pilgrimage or pilgrimage site. And you could slide. I don't know if that's the best example. I don't know if there's a slightly more spiritual festival in America, but Glastonbury's pretty spiritual.
Or Burning Man. Burning Man is certainly
okay, so Burning
become
Man,
a pilgrimage site.
Yeah, Burning Man is a pilgrimage site. The problem with Burning Man, I suppose, is it's in the middle of a desert, so it's not like your
Yes.
typical pilgrimage landscape. But Glastonbury is literally next to Wells Cathedral,
Mm.
Glastonbury Tor, all these mystical pilgrimage sites that are 10,000 years old. So you could do with a small tweak, you could get a lot of people making pilgrimage to that. And that would be much more like what's happening in India. These are the kinds of ideas for scaling up and the impact. The other idea we've got is meeting people at their point of need. So shifting the focus of like history and like intrigue around pilgrimage, but actually towards how can you help people who actually at life transitional moments. And so a GP is surgery is where people go to get better from something, and then they say their problem. And if their problem is something like depression, lack of purpose, not knowing where I'm going in my life, the most obvious thing would be just to say, well, go for a long walk. I mean, obvious to me, because there are all sorts of other things coming in now to help people with these sorts of issues. Like, I mean, it's not long before psychedelics are going to be used for assisted therapy, but it's a deep experience to go into nature, and I don't think anything really substitutes for it. You have to spend time in it to really know the world.
If you were sitting in front of a GP right now, what would you say to them? What's your 10-second or 20-second pitch for why pilgrimage should be considered as one way of addressing mental health issues, but also physiological issues as well?
Okay, I'd say 10 seconds. I'd say a lot of mental health crises is a crisis of meaning in one's life. And the fundamental driver of meaning in humans is stories. And the fundamental stories of the Western civilization are pilgrimage-like. So you've got the Odyssey, you've got the Aeneid, the Iliad, you've got Lord of the Rings. You've got all these incredible journey-based narratives that are very much about walking through the land and
Yes.
in meeting experiences and being changed and transformed and learning something and going
Yes.
through it. So I'd say don't dismiss that as just like interesting stories. That the point underlying it is that we all need to go on a journey.
Exactly. We all need to go on a great quest for meaning.
Yeah. I mean, if we don't do it in this lifetime, we're going to have to do it at some point.
We may be back to do it. Exactly. So how would you envision, and again, I recognize I'm sort of putting you on the spot. You're not a GP. But how would you envision that a GP could prescribe? Is this a suggestion to a patient, or is there something more concrete that could happen in terms of a formal kind of medically codified prescription for a pilgrimage?
Yeah, well, I guess it's money, isn't it? It's like they're going to have help with taking that much time off work, because one of the big barriers is not just money, but time.
Yes.
It takes a long time to do pilgrimage. You have to walk. You have to actually do it. So you're going to have to have a scheme, like not like maternity leave or paternity leave, like
Pilgrimage
kind of
leave.
pilgrimage leave. Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to gather data because around employee retention for organizations that have programs in place that support pilgrimage leave.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's an idea. This will happen. Now, it might
Yes.
not happen in my lifetime, but it just will happen because it always has happened. Like it's so deeply in our culture, and it's so not just culture, but like we know from history that hunter-gatherers made huge journeys, obviously to get food and to be in the right place at the right time for warmth and stuff, but probably also for other reasons. And it probably was just part of who they were. And we have to return to that. And we will. We can have more time, with all this AI and all these tools and all the technology. We'll have the opportunity to do this.
Can you share a few anecdotes from pilgrims that have participated in a BPT-sponsored pilgrimage or who have engaged with BPT after going on a pilgrimage. What are you hearing from pilgrims?
Well, okay, there's the ones I do, which are generally like, I suppose it's a little bit free form in what they give the person, because it's often a bit of history, a bit of songs, a bit of time with each other, a different way of looking at the world, being introduced to beautiful places, connecting with your body in unusual ways, like, I don't know, putting your forehead to the east wall of a church as opposed to going just in through the door in a normal way. And yeah, but in terms of the feedback, it varies hugely depending on what they're coming for. If they're coming to be interested, they can just say, I found that really interesting. It gave me lots to think about. I never knew X, or I never knew this, or it's a place I've always wanted to visit. You know, that kind of level. Some people come where they've really been building up to it, and they're actually nervous when they arrive. And they're like, I'm doing a pilgrimage, and they talk to you very seriously, and they look at you and they say, I don't know what to expect. And I say, we're just going to go for a walk, you know. But it isn't just a walk, and there's never just a walk anyway. Like, I'm pretty certain a lot of walkers are actually pilgrims, and a lot of pilgrims are not are walkers. You know, there's some people who profess to be, I'm a pilgrim, but actually they're just doing a walk. And there are some people who wouldn't say they're a pilgrim, but actually what they're doing really is pilgrimage. And I mean, with our bereavement pilgrimage, which was one for lots of bereaved parents who lost children, there were huge responses to that. I mean, one person said, I feel like I'm now in the driving seat, clutching the wheel again of my life. Other people said, I feel like I can go out into the world again. I feel stronger in my ability to meet the world. And I don't know. When I read these comments, I thought, this is my wonderful colleague Dawn Champion that came up with this idea and actually led this pilgrimage. And when she sent through the feedback, I was like, you know, Dawn, you've really struck on something here. This is massive, because being together and walking and talking and being in holy places and giving people the space to just be with this stuff is emotions and the heart. It requires time, and it requires loving embrace of the community around you. And you can heal, and you can move through things, and it is the stuff of life. It's perhaps the most important stuff of life. And I think we've so many comments. We've got like 4,000. I really should have the best ones to tip to mind. But in long and short of it is, there are so many different answers they can give of what it's given them, and pretty much any reason you can think of, people will probably have for doing it. And it's meaningful for them. And in a way, that's all that matters.
In the case of the pilgrimage for bereaved parents, it's such a beautiful gift also beyond the pilgrimage to bring parents together to support one another. And I imagine that the support they offer each other has continued long past the pilgrimage.
Yeah, but I think they were attracted to come together because it was a walk.
Yeah.
So it's
Yes.
sort of, it feeds each other. That if you said, do you want to meet in a room to talk about it? I don't know whether they'd say yes to that.
This is a particular interest of mine, this idea of this therapeutic dimension of pilgrimages, and there's a very different set of circumstances and feeling around walking together and progressing through the landscape together versus looking to eye. And we're actually more vulnerable when we're side by side sharing whatever kind of comes to mind, rather than there being an intentional focus on sit here in this therapeutic space and and talk about something particular. It's much more fluid when we're walking with other people.
Yeah. Less confrontational.
Yes.
And has a certain rhythm, and you can just stop talking for a while and you carry on walking, which you can't really do if you're looking at someone
That's
in a
true.
cafe. It just, because it gets awkward. If we were to stop talking to each other right now, it'd be really
Yeah.
awkward. You'd
Yeah.
probably start worrying about, time and all this
Or
kind of stuff.
if
Whereas,
I've offended you, or if it's
yeah,
not going according to what you thought or I thought. That's true.
whereas, in a walk, you just naturally go into silence for maybe
Mm.
10 seconds. You just walk, maybe look around you, and then you start talking again when it feels
Yeah.
right. That's the natural cadence of things.
Mm. So, what are your most memorable pilgrimages with the BPT that either you have led or been a participant in?
I think my mind's going to the Anglesey Druid way that was basically tracing the journey of the Romans to destroy the Druids, from Carnarvon to Holyhead. And Anglesey is a very magical island, and there's a lot of prehistory there, and a lot of mythology and battle scenes. And I think what was amazing about that journey was we were creating a song, and it was coming out of nowhere, as songs do. And although it was actually not just coming out of nowhere, it's coming very much out of somewhere, because when we got to the top of the mountain, that's when the song really came. And I guess we're discovering something that's lost, not to resurrect it like the Druidry, not to resurrect Druidry as the answer compared to Christianity, like let's get rid of Christianity, let's put Druidry there in its place so that we can connect to the land again, because like people have beliefs that Christians don't like nature or stuff like that. It's not about that. It's about getting the richness of everything and putting it all one big soup and letting it all sort of cook together and coming up with this magical thing, which is this like humans and nature and the world and what we create and what gets created over time. And what's great about the fact that the Druids were, well, I shouldn't say that, but no, it would have been great if the Druids had carried on, but the fact they were wiped out does allow for people just imagine their traditions and come up with their own. And so people are kind of coming up with their own rituals for connecting with the land. And that's how it always was done, I think, coming up, letting our imagination run wild and then connecting back to the Christian sites through a Druidic lens or and then the other way around, Christians discovering Druidry and finding how they can integrate it in their lives and not reject it, but and still be Christians, and or Muslims or Hindus, or it's about discovering the kind of the complex web of everything, and that nothing is separate. And over time and in place, you realize that.
I'm endlessly fascinated by talking about what is a pilgrim and what is pilgrimage. I just love it. And you mentioned earlier that some pilgrims are walkers and other walkers are actually pilgrims. How do you describe the difference?
I think there's a humility for wanting to be transformed through the journey. And I think a pilgrim who is proud of the fact they're a pilgrim walking through the land and they're doing their journey and they're clocking off the miles and sort of treating it a bit like a kind of, I don't know, like a school exercise or something, like to just tick off. They may not be dropping into their heart enough for that to actually have an impact. And the other way around, someone who doesn't know anything about pilgrimage really and doesn't feel the need to be a pilgrim, and particularly, or they don't have any particular desire to be known as one. Satish Kumar comes up with this brilliant distinction between a tourist and a pilgrim. And tourists, they pay for their package holiday. They know exactly what they're going to do. Mm. And they're expecting certain things. And if they don't get it, they're disappointed in the travel company or like the public transport, whatever it is, there's a problem. And that, whereas a pilgrim just takes whatever comes, whatever the journey is there to show them, it's there to show them.
So this focus on humility prompts me to think that if we peer back into historical exemplars of pilgrimages, there may be some people that were not pilgrims, because they actually are the people that you're describing, where they said, I'm a pilgrim and I'm doing it for this and this and this reason. And there was sort of this lack of humility. And I like to think about this now in this sense, because we think that people in the past had sort of a more authentic pilgrimage experience, but they didn't. They were humans just like us. And some people were pursuing this from this place of humility and this pure heart, as you've described, and others weren't. So actually, the humanity has remained the same.
Yeah, and humility comes from the word humus of Latin, which means ground, and also human. I mean, there must be something going on here about the word humble and humility. Life is probably most enjoyable when it's most simple, I think. I mean, there's a sort of thrill of stuff that's complicated, but there's something really beautiful about a simple, humble life. I was going to say something, but yes, I know we say bring your own beliefs, but true humility, I think, basically says I'm not in control.
Yes.
And whatever is in control is up for debate, but or even if there is such a thing as control, even at the divine level, at the top level. But yeah, I think there is somehow you're to letting go and letting the world, the universe, the cosmos, the God, like divine, whatever you want to call it, take over and just guide you. And I think that's what humility is. And I think that's really, if you can walk like that, you are always going to be a pilgrim and you're always going to discover things.